All right, welcome everybody to our discussion presentation on custody. So I'm always trying to look at things like from the beginner lens, so I apologize if you are not a beginner. But if you are a beginner, Bitcoin custody, you'll hear people talking about a lot, and how you can think about it is like if you buy some gold, someone, could be you, could be someone else, has to physically hold the gold. Either you buy some gold and you have the gold at your house in a safe or something, or you buy some gold and maybe the bank stores it for you, or who knows what. But someone has to custody that gold if you buy the gold. And Bitcoin is the same thing. Now you might say like, well, wait, there is no physical Bitcoin anywhere, right? So, but we still have you still have the ability to custody Bitcoin. That means that you have the ability to hold the Bitcoin and control when you can transact or move that Bitcoin. And so Bitcoin custody is an important aspect of everyone's Bitcoin journey. So storing Bitcoin, controlling your own wealth, important aspect of Bitcoin. Governments all over the world and throughout time have confiscated the wealth of citizens when that wealth was stored with banks or third parties. Third parties and organizations that a government can coerce. And so learning about self-custody or learning about custody in general and custody options is an important step in everyone's Bitcoin journey. So here to talk to us today about custody options, we have Sydney Bright, we have Jonathan Pollack, we have Connor Dolan, and we have Becca Rubenfeld. And their discussion is titled Bitcoin Custody for Beginners, So Many Ways to Hold. So,
thank you very much. So I'm very excited to moderate this panel. You know, we have a very cool diversity of custody types here. And my name is Sydney Bright. I used to host a Bitcoin meetup here about custody in Portland, and now I work for Abundant Minds. And so we can quickly just introduce ourselves really quick, and then we could start from the beginning, and then we can go into the more complexities of our different types.
Sure. My name is Becca Rubenfeld. I'm co-founder and chief operating officer of a company called AnchorWatch. We have a custody platform using technology called Miniscript, and we're also a Lloyd's of London cover holder and do Bitcoin insurance.
I'm Jonathan Pollack. I am the product lead at Bitkey. We build a multi-sig hardware wallet that is self-custody, and we make Bitcoin really easy to use and hard to lose.
I like that. I'm Connor Dolan. I am a VP of Sales at Unchained, which is a Bitcoin native financial services company. Foundation of our platform is multi-signature custody and collaborative custody, setting up a model where you still have control of your keys, but you're not on an island, and you have a team that'll teach you how to hold your own keys and also share responsibility of holding the keys alongside you.
Amazing. So again, I want to make this very approachable for beginners, and then I think we'll move our way up. Becca, I was wondering if you could start us with just, what are keys? What are we even talking about? How should someone even think about what this is?
Sure. So at AnchorWatch, we have developed an analogy that we like to use of a post office to talk about Bitcoin custody. So I'm going to start there, and we'll just talk about what we're talking about with custody. So we already said, it's a bar. With a bar of gold, you can hold the bar of gold. You can give somebody some money and pay them to hold the bar of gold. With Bitcoin, there's additional options, but we're going to start basic. So post office. Picture yourself walking into a post office, and on the wall you see the wall of P.O. boxes. So just something that you've seen before, but this time just picture the little doors being clear. So thick glass, thick plexiglass, something like that. And just like a normal post office box, anybody can go put some mail in the slot, but only the person with the key can go open the door and control what's inside. So when we're talking about Bitcoin, I want you to think of the having control of the Bitcoin is actually having control of that key. So all Bitcoin is protected by private key information. So it's the who has that key and how we protect the key is actually what we're talking about. So if you're thinking, if you've heard the term single-sig or single signature, what that means is just a single key. So picture the P.O. box, you go up, anybody can see what's inside, but only the person with that single key can open the door. And then we can get into more complicated models that we all support. So, I mean, the first next step is think of two keys, right? Think of a nuclear sub and having two people open the door. So I'll pause there for a moment, but really when we're talking about custody, we're just talking about who has that private key, how is that private key held? Is it a single key, or has that secret that the key holds, has it been split into multiple keys?
Awesome. Maybe Connor, could then you describe what does this practically look like? What does a key look like? What's the important things to consider with the safety and protection of that key?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's most valuable, especially for people that are just getting into self-custody and learning about holding your own private keys, is to really zoom out and think big picture. It can almost be paralyzing sometimes to try and dive into the technical aspects of what does a private key actually look like, and all the different formats of it, and the 256-bit number, and all of these different things. The most important thing is whoever controls the private key has the ability to move the Bitcoin. And that's still true if you have Bitcoin on an exchange, which is where a lot of people typically start. The difference is the exchange is the one holding the private key, not you. And so if I have Bitcoin on Coinbase, the benefit there is I don't have to worry about these keys. It's convenient. It's very liquid. The downside is at the end of the day, I am going to be asking Coinbase, or pick your exchange of choice, for permission to have access to my funds. I have to go to Coinbase and say, can you please send the Bitcoin over to this address instead for whatever reason? And Coinbase says, sure thing, we'll use the private key and we'll move that Bitcoin for you. But in a worst case scenario, you have your Bitcoin on the wrong exchange, you've entrusted the wrong third party, and you have your Bitcoin on FTX when they go insolvent. If FTX disappears off the face of the earth and your Bitcoin is on the exchange, you have now lost access to your funds all at once. And I think one of the biggest risks that faces the world today, and where you can go on Twitter right now and find dozens of different examples of not necessarily exchange hacks or people losing their funds, but just being prevented from accessing their funds. They go to Coinbase to ask for permission, and Coinbase says, oh, this is a security flag. We don't know if this is you. Please provide us your information to verify, and then we'll release the funds. It's good intentioned, and it does save Bitcoin from being stolen sometimes, but there are other situations where it takes 3 months of back and forth emails before you can actually access your funds. The point is, Bitcoin provides a solution where you don't have to live this way. It can be intimidating. With great power comes great responsibility. But the reason all of us are up here in different forms is that there are easy ways for you to learn how to hold your own private keys while creating a fault-redundant situation where multiple things can go wrong and you're not at risk of losing your Bitcoin. So I don't know if that answered your question really at all, but I would say most importantly, the biggest thing is whoever controls the private keys controls the ability to move the Bitcoin. If you're not controlling your private keys, you have an IOU on your Bitcoin, and it is really important as we start this journey of decades long that you have the custody model right from the beginning.
So, what is very cool about this group here is that our industry is maturing in the different options someone has, either ease of use or, they have more to save or risk or anything like that. Jonathan, if someone just heard what Connor said and said, okay, well, I only have my Bitcoin on an exchange, without getting into the complexities, which I want to get into of the setups here, what would be the most simplistic, practical steps of what would you need to do to get your own key so that you could move it off an exchange and put it in self-custody?
Yeah, that's a great place to start. So I think maybe the way to think about it is really starting with like what are the tools of custody, and at the sort of core layer you have these hardware signing devices, and their job is to keep a private key safe. They're not connected to the internet. They typically rely on something else to connect to the internet. You want to keep them air gapped, and so this key is very safe and hard to attack digitally because it's in a physical device. But the Bitcoin network is an online network by design. You have to look at the blockchain to see your balances. You have to broadcast to the blockchain to make transactions. So you need something that connects to the internet. And that's typically your wallet. And so you have sort of these two different things, a signer and a wallet. And what can make the sort of market a little confusing when you first get into it is there's all sorts of combinations in this space. So you have some companies that build just signing devices, and an example of that would be like a cold card. You have some companies that build just wallets, which is like maybe a Sparrow or a Blue Wallet. You have some companies that build both, like Ledger is a hardware device, and they have Ledger Live, which is their wallet. But you could use a Ledger with another solution. You could use a Ledger with another wallet. And so you get into this whole space of different types of combinations of hardwares and wallets. Bitkey, for example, builds a hardware wallet and a hardware device and a wallet that can only be used together. And so I think when you think about sort of wading into this self-custody space, what you're doing is you're really sort of choosing sort of the tools you want to work with. And then sort of another dimension here, which is very much related, but I do think of it as another dimension, which is how many keys? You could kind of go the no keys approach. That would be sort of your custodians like a Coinbase or a Cash App. You could do the single-sig approach where you only have one device with one key. You could do a multi-sig approach where you have multiple devices. You could do a collaborative custodian approach, which we're all up here are sort of all different forms of collaborative custodian, where an institution is helping you hold one of your keys in a quorum where there's more keys. And so this is really kind of the space you wrap your head around to decide, okay, every one of these options has different trade-offs, and you need to kind of decide what are the right trade-offs for me to get the custody solution that I'm most comfortable with.
Can I add one thing to that? Just in regards to going back to your question, I would just say the barrier to entry of learning how to hold your own private keys is pretty low. If you think about buying a single hardware wallet and just getting your hands dirty and trying to set it up, if you set up one of these wallets, you don't have to send Bitcoin to it. But for under $100, and Bitkey is a great option. I don't know what the price is, but point being,
99 special here.
There you
at the
go.
conference.
Yeah, exactly. As of today.
Yes.
Point being, you can buy a hardware wallet, you can set it up, and if it's something that is easy enough for an individual who isn't technical to do. And going through that process is a really magical part of learning Bitcoin. When you create your first wallet, you send Bitcoin to it, your understanding of how Bitcoin works grows dramatically. So I would say get started.
So listening to this though, right, there are these signing devices that we get that keep the keys offline. But Becca, could you help the audience understand, what if I put all my money on the signing device and, my house burns down?
Yep. So what we started with is, let's start with that single wallet. So you've gone to the store, you took your private key, you set up one of these these single wallets, and if your house burns down, you lose your Bitcoin. And so additional custody models continue to develop to mitigate some of these risks. So let's start with multisig. So a multisig specifically is where you're bringing additional keys into the quorum. So we use that word, quorum. All we're saying when we say quorum is multiple keys come together to protect the Bitcoin. And so with a multisig wallet, what we're saying is we're bringing in, use for example, 3 of those hardware devices or 3 private keys, and any 2 of those 3 can unlock the Bitcoin. So what that means is if your house burns down, as long as all 3 of them are not located in your house, you would be able to, say, have 1 in your house, 1 in a safe deposit box, and 1 at a family member's house. Any one of those locations could burn down, and you still have 2 of the 3, and therefore you have not lost the Bitcoin. And so companies then exist. For example, the phrase collaborative custody was used. That would be a model where you're just saying a company is going to hold 1 of those 3. on your behalf. So that way you have two. It's truly self-custody. You control the Bitcoin on your own with two of those three. But if something happens, if your house burns down, the business then holds the third wallet, and you would be able to call them and be like, my house burned down, I still have one, I need your help on that second one. And the business would be able to step in. And that is the primary business model of Unchained. A different way of doing multisig is the way our company AnchorWatch does it, where we are both required signers. So we have our wallet as well as your wallet. We both hold those keys, and we both have to sign. And then we have something called timelocks that bring redundancy or disaster scenario that unlocks over time. And so it's all just different ways of combining different keys, different hardware devices in a physically dispersed location to say that any single event, sometimes even multiple events, would not cause a loss of Bitcoin. And maybe you can jump in with your model as well.
Yeah, sure. So Bitkey takes a somewhat unique approach to this. And to explain it, we really need to go to the sort of seed phrases and what they're for. And I feel like most people are quite familiar with them or have at least heard of them. And the reason seed phrases exist is to help you recover when you lose your signing devices. So all signing devices are digital pieces of hardware. They will fail at some point, like all electronics do, whether it's 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. And when they fail, you don't want your keys to be lost with the device. And so what most hardware signers do is after you set them up, they take the key and they export it. And so the key leaves the hardware device and enters your control. And it enters your control in the form of a seed phrase. And so it's a human-readable version of your key. And then you have the burden of figuring out how to protect that key. And what you need to do is you need to figure out how to store that secret in a way where you always have access to it, and nobody else ever has access to it. And if you can solve that problem, then your Bitcoin is safe. And what you need to kind of consider is what are all the things in life that can happen to, you? Could your house burn down? Could someone betray you? Could the government try to confiscate it? You can come up with all of these different scenarios, and you kind of think through, is my key safe in these scenarios? What Bitkey does, and sort of the model that we use, is we say, hey, let's skip that very first step of exporting keys out. Let's just keep the keys safe in the hardware devices and where they're generated, and let's build recovery systems on top of that in a way to regenerate your wallet when you lose your hardware device, when you lose your phone, when you lose both. And what sort of we do at Bitkey is we build basically a system of recovery sort of protocols that protects you from loss or attacks. And it's a mix of multisig and collaborative custody and a bunch of fancy cryptography, but that's sort of our core model.
If I can jump back in, I think one thing, even as I'm listening to us talk, is that a lot of this can be very overwhelming. There's a lot of similar but different custody models. And I think as you start going down this space, as you start learning the differences, what you really want to be thinking about is your personal situation and what you're trying to protect against. Are you trying to protect against your house burning down? Then you need to take that into account when you choose which model pertains to you. Are you trying to protect against physical thefts, wrench attacks, things like that? Then you need to take that into account. And I think I feel very confident that all three of the models that our companies primarily use are all really taking those things into account. The other thing that I would recommend that you think hard about is inheritance. No matter which model you use, you need to make sure that you're able to pass on your Bitcoin and pass on the private key to your spouse, to your children, to your estate. And so when you look at either pure self-custody, where you're not getting any help at all with the keys, or whether you're engaging the services of a company, I would highly encourage you to think about inheritance and think about what information that you are responsible to store and what information the company is responsible to store, and making sure that everybody understands, including your family, what all needs to happen in terms of recovery. It's a very, very important part of self-custody and taking that responsibility on for yourselves.
So I hope this isn't too challenging of a question here, but as you just said, I think it'd be very interesting and helpful to say, right, everyone has their own life circumstance, everyone has different risk profiles or just different ways at which they're going to have to think about it. And I know, we all think that our thing is by far the best, but I'd love it if each one of you could go through each of your products and say, what kind of maybe niche or user would perhaps most benefit from that structure. That way we can almost start to articulate, what are the things that you should keep in mind, and what does each of your products kind of especially benefit. We can just start this way, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I promise I'm not like intentionally dodging every question you ask me. As a starting point, just a couple of, to make sure everyone's on the same page, these little hardware wallets that we're talking about, whether it's a Trezor or a Ledger or a Cold Card or a Bitkey, these devices do not store Bitcoin. They hold the private key to the Bitcoin that sits on this wallet on the blockchain. That private key, you can kind of think about it like a really, really, really long, complex string of numbers that would be impossible to manage. And so if I have this device and I lose it and it's the only copy of the private key, well then I've lost the ability to move that Bitcoin forever. As Becca laid out, I think Jonathan laid out, that seed phrase is a more manageable analog version of that private key. So even with single signature custody, where I'm protecting one private key, there's two things I'm securing: the device itself, which I actually connect to the computer and press buttons and provide a signature, and then the seed phrase, which is there in case that device were to ever fail. We put those in separate places, and that's the base security model. That's a great starting point, but it doesn't address a lot of the single points of failure that exist with custody long term. What happens if I lose that device and the seed phrase at the exact same time? My Bitcoin's gone forever. What happens if someone gets their hands on my seed phrase? They just need to do the same thing to recover the private key, buy their own device, put in the words. Now they have a copy of the private key and they have the ability to move the Bitcoin. And so when you look at the educational journey of going down the Bitcoin custody rabbit hole, you end up with multi-signature custody inevitably, because you can create an address where there are multiple private keys so that I can lose one key and everything can still be okay. And so the reason why I bring that up, going back to your question, and Becca's point, inheritance and succession planning is a huge part of collaborative custody and what we do at Unchained. And really what all of us do. The benefit of multisig and collaborative custody is now I can solve the question, how do I pass along my Bitcoin to my loved ones without giving anyone access to the Bitcoin while I'm alive? If there's only one private key, if there's only one seed phrase, I can't give that seed phrase to my estate planner without losing sleep at night, or my brother-in-law, or whoever it may be, knowing at any point they could take that Bitcoin seed phrase and access my funds. But in this 2 of 3 model, which is what Unchained implements as well, 3 private keys, you need any 2 of them to move the Bitcoin. As a client, you hold 2 and we hold 1. I can now give a seed phrase to the copy of my, give a copy of my seed phrase to my executor or my lawyer, or whoever it may be, sleep at night knowing that they don't have access to Bitcoin because they only have 1 key, but assuming I pick the right person, when I pass away, they reach out to Unchained or AnchorWatch, or I'm not as familiar with Bitkey's recovery solution, but I think it's in the same line. The idea is I now have a solution. And so to go back to answer your question, I would say we cater to individuals, businesses of all different types and sizes, young individuals, old individuals, but I would say our primary service that we offer is individuals who have amassed a stack of Bitcoin that they care about, that they want to protect for the long term, and they want to they're not going to touch this Bitcoin for years or decades anyways, so let's make sure we have a good custody model from the get-go to make sure that Bitcoin is there 10 years from now or 50 years from now for my grandkids to enjoy. So I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Yeah, part of what was sort of the end, like the founding story of Bitkey, or sort of why Jack Dorsey decided to incubate a custody wallet, was sort of just the observation of how hard self-custody is to use, and wanted to make it easy, sort of this Bitcoin is for everyone type of ethos. And the the core idea here was that it's hard for sort of two reasons. One, you kind of have to learn a lot to sort of just wrap your heads around keys and signers and seeds and wallets and all of that stuff. But that's not really the hardest part, because if you spend the time, you'll learn it. The harder part is you can't make a mistake, because you're in a scenario where if you make a mistake, all your Bitcoin's gone. Like if you accidentally hold your seed phrase in front of a camera, in front of your phone's camera, you take a picture of it because you think it's safe in iCloud, you decide to hide it at your parents' house or your friend's house, or there's so many decisions you have to make about how to protect your secrets. So the sort of core idea behind Bitkey was to make a wallet that's really hard to mess up. And so one of the core ideas is we chose not to do seed phrases, because we felt that giving seed phrases to customer basically just shifts the burden of protecting secrets onto the customer and says, hey, you figure out how to store it, you figure out how to hide it, you figure out how to recover if you lose it. And we just wanted to build an overall system that says, when you turn it on, it's multisig, it's collaborative custody. You lose the hardware, lose your phone, lose both. There's recovery systems there for you. Set up inheritance, and that'll work too. And so I think the kind of unique thing about our approach is to assume that you don't have a perfect operator. And I think many of the solutions in the space fall apart if you assume an imperfect operator. And that's kind of really our motivating mission.
So AnchorWatch built our platform to be sufficient for institutional grade custody. So everything about us as a company is for enterprise grade, institutional grade custody. What that means is that the security level is that for hundreds of billions of dollars. However, we are happy to serve retail customers as well. And what that means is that you get the benefit of all that security, even if you're protecting, a few coins. Because at the end of the day, it is your nest egg, and you need that level of security and that level of comfort. So our custody model is one that we consider supported self-custody. And the reason I use that word is that, AnchorWatch is primarily known as providing insurance, and our custody services are insured by Lloyd's of London. And while you're insured, while we in Lloyd's of London have liability for the production of your Bitcoin, we are also a required signer. So it's a little bit different model than the company just being a backup, whereas really we are sharing the custody, but only while we have liability for the protection of it. And then using those time locks that I talked about earlier, if you didn't want to be our customer anymore, if you were, let's say you had an insured custody with us for a year, at the end of the year you didn't want to be our customer, maybe we disappeared. Maybe we're bad actors. Maybe we refused to sign a transaction for any reason. Your Bitcoin, the vault that your Bitcoin is in, is pre-programmed to revert to pure self-custody, where we are not a required signer, where we actually have no power whatsoever when your insurance policy ends. So while we're protecting you, while we're insuring your Bitcoin against a loss of due to theft, physical events, really anything that would make you lose permanent access to your Bitcoin, we share custody, we sign a transaction with you, and then again, it reverts to self-custody. So the platform itself is ideal for companies. You can distribute keys across executives, across accountants, across auditors, while AnchorWatch is still a required signer. And then we have those time locks for all sorts of corporate resiliency planning. However, all those features work just as well for a family. And what it translates to is foolproof inheritance. It's something where the spouse, the estate, doesn't need to understand Bitcoin whatsoever. You don't need to understand those seed phrases, hardware wallets. You don't need to know PIN phrases. We've abstracted all of that away into a recovery layer. And so what we think we've given both individuals and companies is kind of something that includes the majority of benefits of self-custody, but also brings in a lot of the security layers that maybe an institutional custodian would provide as well. And we think it's really a nice mix of both.
I think that ties a very nice bow on this sort of lesson here. Hopefully this was helpful. I suppose we can open up the questions for the rest of our time. Are there any questions?
Dave.
Thank you very much. I'm trying to figure out exactly how to phrase this, but the intention for each of you is when you're talking to a new potential customer calls you up, right? And what is, I guess, the easy way to put this out? so glad. This is like a really key, thing that we bring to the table. I want you to understand.
Go ahead. Yep.
So I think this will be pretty quick because I kind of talked about it already, but one that we get a lot that we love answering is when folks hear, hey, Bitkey has no seed phrase, a very common question is it self-custody? And that sort of allows us to talk about the difference between seed phrases and private keys, and how seed phrases are just a tool to generate a private key, and how self-custody is about owning your private keys. And so in Bitkey, you own 2 of the 3 private keys, you have full control of the wallet, and yes, that's all done without seed phrases. And so what I really like about that question is like it's so many people, and not just people who are new to the space, even like when you've been in it for a while, they've become so conflated, these 2 concepts, that starting to separate them out, I think, really starts to reveal some of the inner workings of how Bitcoin works, and how the sort of the steps you need to take to kind of be in control of your own money.
With AnchorWatch, we get asked, what does the insurance cover? How can I trust that the insurance will take care of me in the case of, most commonly I get asked about wrench attacks. And the answer is yes, it doesn't cover losses of Bitcoin due to wrench attacks, whether the gun is to your family's head or to AnchorWatch's head, that would be covered. And the other thing we get asked the most about is inheritance, how customers can feel confident that their family member will recover access to their Bitcoin in the case of death, and we walk them through that.
As VP of Sales, I think my favorite question is probably, how do I sign up? I do like talking through that misconception about Bitcoin being stored in devices. It's not really a question as much as I get a lot of light bulbs that go off when I'm talking through how custody works, and just changing. You can see the gears turning in real time when you start thinking about, like, oh, the Bitcoin isn't actually living. Cryptography starts to play a much bigger part. So I really enjoy that conversation.
How does survivor access work in case of
Hold on 1 second here. We're going to try and get questions on the mic so that it can get picked up by the video.
How would survivor access work in the case of an accidental death? Would the spouse have access? Would a family member, how does that work?
I think we all have slightly different answers, so I'll try to be very quick. So with AnchorWatch's solution, we have what's called a recovery layer. So it's a pre-programmed, time-locked way to spend Bitcoin, more or less a spending condition, but that has a time element on it. What we do is a multi-institutional recovery. So while you're insured, it starts out where you hold keys and we hold keys. Right before it becomes pure self-custody, there's a time-locked option where AnchorWatch and a second institution, can together sign the Bitcoin to recover. So if you passed away, your beneficiary would reach out to us, or when we hadn't heard from you, we would be looking for your beneficiary because you've given us that contact information. And then we would be able to use the multi-institutional recovery layer to actually move the Bitcoin out of your impaired vault with the missing keys into a brand new vault, and then we'd be able to take care of the family.
For Unchained, to simplify it, we're going to work with the executor of your estate. So whoever your executor is, if they reach out to Unchained, we're going to verify that they're the executor, verify you've passed away, and then, of course, they're going to need 1 key. Typically, that's passed along most easily by having a copy of a seed phrase. And so there's a model. We don't necessarily recommend it, but there is a world where your spouse, whoever your executor is, doesn't need to know anything about Bitcoin or private keys. They just need to know, take this piece of paper and reach out to Unchained.
Yeah, Bitkey's a little different because we don't do any identity or KYC, so we don't know who you are or who your beneficiary is. And so the way it works in Bitkey is you go into your wallet and you tap a Set Up Beneficiary button, and that'll let you link your Bitkey wallet to another Bitkey wallet, and then your beneficiary's wallet gets this button in it that says Claim Inheritance. And that triggers a process where over the next 6 months, the benefactor, your wallet, will get an alert every couple of days that says, hey, a claim has been started, click here to cancel. And presumably you don't cancel it because you're not around, and then after the 6 months, the money moves to the other wallet.
Thanks very much. It's a great panel. Could we talk a little bit about the privacy aspect, where you guys have information about us as a customer, and you also have the balance of the wallet? So on the one hand, what happens if you guys get hacked? Obviously, Microsoft corporate's been hacked, so it's eventually happens everywhere. So what happens with that aspect of the privacy? Yeah.
You got an easy answer.
Yeah, should I start? Yeah, so to build on the answer before, we don't have customer information for our wallets, and so there isn't a way to link your personal identity to your wallet balance.
For Unchained, we are a KYC institution. We offer financial services like a trading desk where you can buy and sell Bitcoin. We have commercial loans, and so as a part of all of that, we need to follow KYC, AML laws. We see that as a benefit for scenarios like verifying identity and inheritance. There is a trade-off there, of course. I'll always tell a client, if you have non-KYC Bitcoin, don't send it to Unchained. But theoretically, any Bitcoin you're sending to Unchained is already KYC'd anyways. That information is out there. Now, to go to your question about a hack, that's the beauty of the custody model, and that's going to be true for all of us. None of these custody models are in a, well, I don't want to speak on behalf of others, but we're never in a situation where we have control of the Bitcoin. Our keys are stored in cold storage anyways, so a hack of the system wouldn't give someone access to the private key. But whether it's a rogue employee or the government coming in, maybe that's the most realistic scenario. Bitcoin is illegal and the feds raid our office and everyone shuts down. Even in a model where they did have the key, they wouldn't have access to the Bitcoin. But yeah, I mean, that we do KYC, and you should not send non-KYC Bitcoin to an Unchained wallet.
If I can just redirect the question, it's more about the xpub, that you have the xpub, and if the xpub and the name get leaked, then that becomes public knowledge, way beyond the KYC of the exchange that I bought it on. That's the risk that I'm trying to mitigate against.
So the xpub does share certain information about how your Bitcoin is being stored. So there is a difference that's important for people to understand, and that difference is one that is a security risk versus a privacy risk. So what Mark is asking about is a privacy risk. So it's information that if accessed, somebody could understand, for example, potentially, if it was a single-sig versus a multi-sig. Right? Something like that. And if you have a little additional information, that can help an attacker plan some sort of heist because they have a little bit more information. But as Connor was indicating, that information is not your private key. So there's privacy risks, and then there's actual Bitcoin security. And in that case, they're actually unrelated. And then in terms of AnchorWatch, we also are KYC. We're institutional grade. We've been SOC 2 certified. We practice data segregation. And so we do everything in our power to protect customer privacy and their data. But at the end of the day, the Bitcoin security is what is protecting your actual assets, and that is unrelated.
I think a really important point with this whole discussion as well is that there are trade-offs to any custody model. There are trade-offs between the three models that we offer up here. There are pros and cons to single-sig versus multi-sig. You could set up a multi-sig arrangement on your own and be significantly more private than utilizing AnchorWatch or Unchained, for example. But then you need to figure out how to address the risk of you passing away and what that succession plan looks like. You kind of started it off by saying it really depends on your situation and what risks you are trying to identify. And I think all of us have come to the agreement that multi-signature custody and collaborative custody feels like the right mix for most people, but there are trade-offs. And And utilizing Unchained, for example, one of the trade-offs is going to be privacy. The counter-argument to that could be, you can be as private as you want, but if your security model has a flaw in it, you can be the most private person in the world with no Bitcoin because you messed up one thing and now you don't have a stack to be private about anymore. So there's trade-offs any way you cut it.
We'll do one last question.
I'm going to try to put this the right way. So no matter what, as an individual, when you own some Bitcoin, you still need to keep whatever information you have in a secure way. And so that can be through the cold storage or having some sort of device that has information in it. What do y'all recommend, whether digitally or as a hardware or a hard device, that the best, most secure way is to preserve that in terms of where to hold on to that, or both digitally as well as physically?
Saying a definitive what is the best is hard, because really all our companies have developed to try to solve for that question, right? So it's an important question. I don't know that there is literally a best. There's a model that provides the protections for different people. So I think in terms of devices, one of our three companies actually creates them, Bitkey. There are others like Cold Card, Ledger, Trezor, those kind of things.
That's not my question.
Okay.
So,
Where do you store it?
so
Oh,
when you
physically,
have it,
physically, where do you store
where
them?
do you store it?
I mean, I would say from a multi-sig standpoint, they need to be in separate locations. As an insurer, I dictate that if you have multi-sig, they can't be at the same address. So actuarially, we can reduce risk if literally just one is in a house and one is in an office and one is in a bank even a mile away. Having three locations significantly reduces the risk of any sort of physical event, like fire, weather event, that kind of thing. Also makes heists harder. Somebody can put a gun to somebody's head and take a single device, but if they have to walk you into the bank vault, that's a different type of criminal who's willing to do that. So maybe I'll just pause there and just say spread out and not in a single location would be my starter advice.
If you all don't mind, I have a, what I tend to recommend to clients, unless you're going to go with the Bitkey, every system you have will end up with some kind of device with some kind of 12 or 24 word seed phrase backup. And personally, I think the most important thing to think about is just what do you do with those words, and what you do with those words is, in my opinion, you engrave them on a piece of metal and you put them somewhere. Now, where you put them, I shouldn't give you advice, and you should, none of us should say it because like privacy and secrecy of what you do with that piece of metal is of the utmost. But right, all these talk of keys, unless you're going to go with the big key, I think it's most ideal to think you have a piece of metal with those words, and that piece of metal is your property, it's your Bitcoin, and you just keep it safe.
I think maybe going back to the very first question, this might be my new favorite question, and because I think it really gets at the heart of self-custody, which is like, I have these secrets and how do I protect them? And the question is like, how many copies should I have? How should I distribute them? Where should they go? And I think the point of view of Bitkey is that's the hardest part of the problem, and we shouldn't give it to customers as say, hey, do your own, do it yourself solution. And so what we do is Bitkey just builds an entire framework for recovery and security, and you're not given any artifacts to hide or store or distribute.